My name is Margaret, and at 68 years old, I never expected my adopted children would abandon me. After raising Jessica and Brandon alone when my husband died, the car accident changed everything. As I lay broken in that hospital bed, I overheard the doctors call them. Their response still cuts like glass. She's not our real mom. We owe her nothing. Little did they know I had one final lesson to teach them. When they came for my money a week later, they found only an empty bed and a letter. Let me know where you're watching from today, and hit that subscribe button before I share how my children learned what family truly means. I was born in a small town in Wisconsin, where life moved slowly and everyone knew each other. My parents weren't wealthy, but they taught me the value of hard work and compassion. Our house was modest, with creaky wooden floors and windows that frosted over in winter, but it was filled with love. I still remember the smell of my mother's apple pie cooling on the windowsill every Sunday after church. I met Robert during nursing school. He was studying to become a medical technician, and we first locked eyes in the hospital cafeteria when we both reached for the last cup of coffee. He insisted I take it and I insisted we share it. That coffee date turned into 50 more, and before I knew it, we were standing at the altar exchanging vows. Robert had gentle blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled and hands that were always warm, even in the coldest Wisconsin winters. We tried for years to have children of our own. Month after month of disappointment left us hollow, especially after 3 miscarriages that each took a piece of my heart. The doctors eventually confirmed what we feared. I would never be able to carry a child to term. I remember crying in Robert's arms all night when we got the news. By morning, though, Robert had wiped away my tears and said words I will never forget. There are so many children who need love, Margaret, and we have so much love to give. The adoption process was grueling. Interviews, home studies, background checks, and mountains of paperwork. But then came the day we met Jessica. She was 4 years old with wild curly hair and suspicious eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. Her birth parents had been drug addicts who neglected her badly before the state intervened. She didn't speak a word during our first meeting, just clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit and watched our every move. She needs time, the social worker explained. She's been through a lot. I knelt down to her level and spoke softly. That's a beautiful rabbit you have. Does he have a name? After a long pause, she whispered, Hoppy. It was the first word of many we would share over the years. 2 years later, we welcomed Brandon into our home. He was just 2 years old, a boisterous little boy with dimples and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. His situation had been different from Jessica's. His young mother had given him up, knowing she couldn't provide for him. He came to us with fewer emotional scars but just as much need for stability and love. I remember the night we officially became a family of 4. We had a small celebration at home with a homemade cake that Jessica helped decorate with uneven blue frosting. Now you're my real mom and dad, she declared, frosting smeared across her cheek. Robert and I exchanged glances, our eyes brimming with tears of joy. But our happiness was short-lived. Just 3 years after Brandon's adoption, Robert clutched his chest one morning while getting ready for work. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. An undetected heart condition had taken him in an instant, leaving me alone with 2 young children and a mountain of grief. I didn't have time to fall apart. Jessica was 7 and Brandon 5, both confused and frightened by the sudden absence of their father. They had already experienced abandonment once. I refused to let them feel it again. So I pulled double shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. Nights when I wasn't working, I was helping with homework, attending school functions, or simply holding my children as they cried for the father they missed. My own grief had to wait until after they were asleep, when I could silently sob into Robert's pillow that no longer smelled like him. Financial struggles became our constant companion. Robert's life insurance helped initially, but I refused to touch the principal, saving it instead for the children's education. I sold my wedding ring to pay for Jessica's braces. I canceled cable TV and cut our grocery budget to afford Brandon's baseball league fees. We moved to a smaller house in a different neighborhood to reduce our mortgage. Every sacrifice seemed worth it when I saw Jessica's straight smile or watched Brandon hit his first home run. On particularly tight months, I would skip meals, claiming I had already eaten at the hospital. The children never knew how many nights I went hungry so they could have seconds. Despite our challenges, we created beautiful memories. Jessica's 10th birthday party at the local park, where I stayed up all night baking cupcakes shaped like the characters from her favorite book. Brandon's elementary school graduation, where he insisted on wearing Robert's tie, rolled up several times and still dragging on the floor. Family movie nights with popcorn on our threadbare couch. All of us wrapped in one large blanket because the heating bill was too high that month. As they entered their teenage years, I noticed subtle changes. Jessica became more concerned with brand names and fitting in with the popular crowd. Brandon started comparing our modest home to his friends' larger houses. I dismissed these as normal teenage growing pains, believing the values Robert and I had worked to instill would eventually resurface. When college applications began, both children set their sights on expensive private universities. I took on extra weekend shifts and sold the last of my family heirlooms, including my grandmother's antique locket, to help fund their dreams. The night Jessica received her acceptance letter to Stanford, I pretended the tears in my eyes were purely from pride, not from the knowledge that I'd just taken out a second mortgage on our home to afford it. "You deserve the best education, sweetheart," I told her as she danced around the kitchen with the letter. "Your father would be so proud." Brandon followed his sister to an elite business school on the East Coast 2 years later. I stood in our driveway waving goodbye until his car disappeared from sight, then went inside to calculate how many extra shifts I would need to cover his housing deposit. Little did I know that as my children drove away from our modest home, they were also driving away from the values that had once defined our family. The warning signs were there, but a mother's love can be blind, especially one who had fought so hard for the title. The first Thanksgiving after Jessica left for college, she called to say she wouldn't be coming home. "My roommate invited me to her family's place in Aspen," she explained, her voice tinged with excitement I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "They have a ski lodge, Mom." "A whole lodge?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, swallowing my disappointment. "Have a wonderful time." I hung up and stared at the turkey I'd already bought, the cranberry sauce made from scratch the way she liked it. Brandon still came home that year, but spent most of the time on his phone, texting friends from school. When I asked about his classes, his answers were clipped, impatient. "It's complicated, Mom. You wouldn't understand the business concepts." The calls became less frequent. Jessica once went 3 months without returning my messages, finally texting back, "Sorry, super busy with internship applications." Brandon called more often, but usually when his monthly allowance ran out earlier than expected. "The cost of living here is crazy, Mom. Could you transfer just a little extra this month?" During Jessica's junior year, she brought home a boyfriend for spring break. Alexander came from a family with old money and even older prejudices. He addressed me as Mrs. Wilson despite my insistence on Margaret, and seemed perpetually unimpressed by our home. "You actually grew up here?" I overheard him ask Jessica when they thought I was in the kitchen. "Unfortunately," she replied with a laugh that felt like a slap. "Can't wait to show you my new apartment in San Francisco. It's in a doorman building." I pretended not to notice how Jessica straightened the living room furniture before taking photos, carefully angling the camera to avoid the worn spots on our couch. How she introduced me to Alexander as Margaret, rather than my mom. Small wounds that accumulated like paper cuts. Brandon graduated with honors and immediately landed a job with a prestigious firm in Seattle. "The starting salary is incredible, Mom," he boasted during a rare call. "I've already put a deposit down on a condo." "That's wonderful, honey. Will you be coming home before you move west?" "Probably not," he said, distracted by something on his end. "The onboarding schedule is pretty intense. I'll send you my new address, though." When Jessica announced her engagement to Alexander a year later, I was thrilled to finally have a reason to see my daughter. I drained my remaining savings to contribute to what she described as a small, intimate ceremony, but turned out to be an extravagant affair for 200 guests at a vineyard in Napa Valley. The wedding cost more than my annual salary, yet somehow I found myself seated at a back table with distant cousins of Alexander's family rather than at the family table up front. When I approached Jessica during the reception, resplendent in her designer gown that cost as much as a used car, She introduced me to her new in-laws with a qualification that pierced my heart. "This is Margaret, my adoptive mother," she said, emphasizing the word that had never before been necessary between us. Later, I overheard her explaining to Alexander's grandmother, "No, not my birth mother. She adopted me when I was 4. My real parents couldn't take care of me." Real parents. The phrase echoed in my mind for weeks afterward. I finally saved enough to visit Brandon in Seattle 6 months after he moved. His condo overlooked the water, with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that looked uncomfortable but expensive. He seemed annoyed by my presence from the moment I arrived, checking his watch frequently and answering work emails during our brief conversations. "I would have preferred some notice before you booked this trip," he said on my second day, not looking up from his laptop. "I have a really important client dinner tonight. I emailed you 3 weeks ago," I reminded him gently, "and called twice to confirm." He had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "Right. Things have been crazy. Listen, would you mind staying in tonight? My colleagues don't really do the whole family dinner thing." I spent that evening alone in his sterile guest room, looking through old photos on my phone of a gap-toothed Brandon proudly showing off his science fair ribbon, of Jessica and him building a snowman in our front yard, their cheeks rosy with cold and excitement. Where had those children gone? The final blow came on my 65th birthday. After 40 years of nursing, I had finally retired. Both Jessica and Brandon had promised to come home for a small celebration. I spent days preparing, cleaning the house from top to bottom, cooking their favorite meals, even buying a new dress for the occasion. Neither of them showed up. Jessica called that morning with a vague excuse about Alexander's work commitment. Brandon texted 2 days later, "Sorry about missing your birthday. Lost track of the date with this merger happening. We'll make it up to you." He never did. Neither of them did. I sold the family home that year. It was too large for just me, and the property taxes had become unmanageable on my fixed income. I found a small 1-bedroom apartment in a senior living community, surrounded by people my own age who understood the peculiar grief of having children who were alive but absent. It was during my annual physical that I received the news about the cancer. Early stage, the doctor assured me, but requiring immediate treatment. "Do you have family who can help you through this?" she asked kindly. I started to mention my children, then stopped myself. "Yes," I lied. "I have support." I didn't tell Jessica or Brandon about the diagnosis. Our communications had become so infrequent and superficial that it seemed an intrusion to burden them with my health concerns. Besides, I told myself, why worry them when the prognosis was relatively good? The truth was, I feared their indifference more than the disease growing inside me. The night of the accident remains fragmented in my memory. Rain pelted against my windshield as I drove home from the community center, where I volunteered teaching English to immigrant nurses. The headlights coming toward me seemed to be in the proper lane, until suddenly they weren't. I remember a flash of light, the sickening crunch of metal, and then nothing. I awakened to the steady beep of hospital monitors, and the antiseptic smell that had once been as familiar to me as my own perfume. My body felt like it had been shattered and poorly reassembled. A young nurse with kind eyes noticed I was conscious and hurried to my side. "Mrs. Wilson, you're at Mercy Hospital. You've been in an accident, but you're stable now." My throat felt like sandpaper. "How bad?" I managed to whisper. She adjusted my foreline with practiced hands. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding that required surgery, and a concussion. But you're tough. The doctor will be in shortly to explain everything." As the fog of pain medication lifted, I became aware of voices just outside my door. The curtain was partially drawn, allowing me to see a doctor in a white coat speaking into a phone. "Yes, I'm calling regarding Margaret Wilson. She's been in a serious accident and is currently stable but in critical condition. We found your number as her emergency contact." A pause. "Yes, she's expected to recover, but will need significant care during rehabilitation. As her daughter, we wanted to inform you of the situation and discuss discharge planning for when she's ready to leave the hospital." Even through my haze of pain, I strained to hear Jessica's response. The doctor had put the call on speaker while writing notes in my chart. "Look, I haven't spoken to her in months. Jessica's voice came through, clear and irritated. We're not close. She's not my real mom anyway, just someone who adopted me when I was a kid. I have my own family to worry about now. I really don't have time for this. The doctor frowned. Ms. Wilson, your mother is seriously injured and will need support during recovery. She's not my mother, Jessica snapped. I don't mean to sound heartless, but we owe her nothing. She chose to adopt us. We didn't choose her. I have 2 young children and a husband whose political campaign is launching next month. I can't drop everything for someone who's essentially a distant relative at this point. The doctor ended the call, his expression grim. He immediately dialed another number, presumably Brandon's. I closed my eyes, not wanting him to know I had overheard, but unable to block out the conversation that followed. Mr. Wilson? This is Dr. Reeves from Mercy Hospital in Chicago. Your mother, Margaret Wilson, has been in a serious accident. Brandon's response came through clearly in the quiet hospital room. My mother? What happened? Is she asking for money again? The doctor's voice turned cold. No, Mr. Wilson. She's asking for nothing. I'm calling to inform you that she's been critically injured in a car accident and may have a difficult recovery ahead. Look, I'm really busy right now. I'm in the middle of a major project that could make or break my career. She was always guilt-tripping us anyway, making us feel bad for having our own lives. I'm sure she'll be fine. She always managed on her own before. So you won't be coming to see her? The doctor asked, making no attempt to hide his judgment. I can't just drop everything and fly across the country for someone who's probably just going to complain about how I don't visit enough. Send me the hospital bill if that's what this is about. The call ended. I lay perfectly still, tears sliding silently down my temples and into my hair. The physical pain of my broken body was nothing compared to the shattering of the last illusion I had maintained about my children. All those years of love, sacrifice, and devotion had meant nothing. To them, I was an obligation they had escaped, not a mother they had loved. Later that afternoon, Dr. Reeves sat beside my bed with a grave expression that told me he had more bad news. He explained that during my emergency surgery, they had discovered my cancer had progressed much further than my previous scans had indicated. The trauma from the accident has complicated things significantly, he explained gently. The cancer has metastasized to your liver and bones. I'm very sorry, Margaret, but we're no longer looking at a curable situation. How long? I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. With aggressive palliative treatment, perhaps a few months. Without it, weeks. He hesitated. I need to ask again about family support. The kind of care you'll need isn't something you should face alone. I thought of Jessica's cold dismissal, of Brandon's casual indifference to my condition. I don't have family, I said finally, but I do have friends. That night, as I lay awake listening to the muted sounds of the hospital, I reflected on what constitutes family. I had believed that love, sacrifice, and years of shared experiences would create bonds stronger than blood. I had been wrong, at least with Jessica and Brandon. The next morning, I was introduced to my hospital roommate as they wheeled her in. Eleanor Carson was 73, recovering from hip replacement surgery, with a sharp wit and no patience for self-pity, either her own or others. So your kids are garbage people, she said bluntly after I reluctantly shared my situation. Join the club. My son didn't speak to me for 12 years because I didn't like his first wife. Turned out I was right about her, but that's beside the point. Despite her gruffness, or perhaps because of it, I found myself drawing strength from Eleanor's company. Unlike the nurses and doctors who treated me with careful sympathy, she offered no platitudes, just straightforward companionship and occasionally, her dry humor. The trick, she told me one evening, is to remember that you're still worth something with or without ungrateful children. I learned that the hard way. On her 3rd day in the hospital, Eleanor received a visitor who changed my perspective entirely. Amanda, Eleanor's daughter, arrived with a vase of fresh flowers and a gentle manner that immediately put me at ease. She visited daily, bringing home-cooked meals, fresh pajamas, and most importantly, genuine affection for her mother. We weren't always this close, Amanda confided to me one afternoon while Eleanor napped. Mom and I had a terrible falling out when I was in college. Didn't speak for nearly 2 years. What changed? I asked. We both did, she said simply. And we both decided the relationship was worth saving, even if it meant admitting we were wrong. She smiled at her sleeping mother. Best decision I ever made. Watching their interaction gave me an unexpected gift in my final days. The knowledge that true family relationships were possible, even if they hadn't worked out for me. It wasn't that I had failed as a mother. It was that Jessica and Brandon had failed to recognize the value of what they had been given. As my condition deteriorated, I made a decision that would set in motion the final chapter of my relationship with my children. I would not reach out to them again. I would not beg for the love and care that should have been freely given. Instead, I would use what little time I had left to create meaning elsewhere. And I would leave them one final lesson about the true nature of family. Eleanor was discharged before me, but she returned to visit daily, often accompanied by Amanda. On her third visit, she brought unexpected news. I've spoken with Amanda and we have a proposition for you, Eleanor announced, sitting carefully in the visitor's chair beside my bed. When you're discharged, you shouldn't be alone. My house has a guest suite on the main floor. It's yours if you want it. I was stunned by the generosity from someone who had been a stranger just days before. I couldn't impose like that. Amanda leaned forward. It's not an imposition. Mom has the space and I live just 10 minutes away. Between the two of us, we can help with your care. She smiled warmly. Besides, Mom enjoys your company, though she'd never admit it. Eleanor rolled her eyes but didn't contradict her daughter. But my treatment? I began. We've already checked. There's an excellent hospice program that serves our neighborhood, Eleanor said matter-of-factly. They'll coordinate with your oncologist here. Their kindness brought tears to my eyes. Why would you do this for someone you barely know? Eleanor's face softened. Because 20 years ago, I was in a similar situation. A colleague took me in after my surgery when my son was too busy to help. I swore if I ever had the chance to pay it forward, I would. With that settled, I turned my attention to practical matters. I asked Amanda, who worked as a paralegal, to help me contact a reputable estate attorney. 2 days later, Walter Green arrived at my hospital room with a leather portfolio and a compassionate demeanor that put me at ease immediately. Mrs. Wilson, Amanda explained your situation. I'm very sorry about both your health and family circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Green. I appreciate your coming to me. I have limited time and important decisions to make. He nodded, opening his portfolio. Let's start by reviewing your assets. I understand you're concerned your children might not be aware of their extent. I smiled thinly. My children believe I'm nearly destitute. It suited me to let them think so when they stopped offering to help with my expenses. We went through my financial documents methodically. Robert's life insurance policy that I had invested rather than spent, growing steadily over the decades. My nursing pension. The proceeds from selling the family home, most of which remained untouched. Various investments made with the guidance of a financial advisor who had been a grateful patient of mine. Walter's eyebrows rose as the total value became clear. This is a substantial estate, Mrs. Wilson. Considerably more than most people would guess from your lifestyle. I lived simply by choice, Mr. Green, and perhaps partly to test my children's character. I sighed. A test they failed spectacularly. And now you wish to create a new will? Yes, but not a simple one. I have specific conditions in mind. For the next hour, we crafted a document that would become my final communication with my children. Walter occasionally suggested legal refinements, but largely supported my vision. When we finished, he looked at me with respect. This is unusual, but entirely legal. And if I may say so, rather brilliant. Not brilliant, I corrected him. Just necessary. One last attempt to teach them what really matters. The day I was discharged from the hospital, Amanda and Eleanor arrived together to transport me to my new temporary home. As we pulled away from the hospital, I didn't look back. That part of my life, the lonely widowed nurse who had sacrificed everything for ungrateful children, was over. Eleanor's home was a charming Victorian with a newly added accessible suite on the main floor. The guest room had large windows overlooking a garden beginning to bloom with spring flowers. A hospital bed had been installed, but it was dressed with colorful quilts that made it look less institutional. On the bedside table stood a vase of fresh daisies, my favorite. Amanda set everything up, Eleanor explained, watching me take in the space. She remembered you mentioning daisies the other day. Such a small detail. Yet my own children wouldn't have known my favorite flower despite my tending a daisy garden throughout their childhood. As I settled into my new routine, Amanda made another suggestion that would profoundly affect my final weeks. I work part-time at the Harmony Youth Center, she explained during dinner one evening. It's a place for teens in foster care or unstable homes to get support, mentoring, homework help. We're always looking for volunteers, especially those with life experience. Amanda, Eleanor chided. Margaret needs to rest, not take on volunteer work. I surprised myself by saying, actually, I'd like to hear more about it. The following day, Amanda took me to the center, a converted warehouse with bright murals on the exterior walls. Inside, teens of various ages gathered in different areas, some studying, others creating art or playing games. Despite my wheelchair and obvious frailty, the staff welcomed me warmly. We have several seniors who mentor our kids, explained the director, Patricia. Many of our teens have never had a stable grandparent figure. Your nursing background would be especially valuable. We have several kids interested in healthcare careers with nobody to guide them. I began visiting twice weekly, starting with simple tasks like helping with homework or participating in group discussions. Despite my declining health, or perhaps because of it, I found the work deeply fulfilling. These children, many of whom had been abandoned or betrayed by family just as I had been, understood loss in ways my own children never had. One girl in particular, Abigail, sought me out consistently. 16 years old with a talent for art and a history of multiple foster placements, she reminded me of Jessica at that age, bright, guarded, yearning for connection but afraid to trust. My caseworker says I'm too old to be adopted now, she confided one afternoon as we worked on her biology homework. Nobody wants a teenager. I thought of how eagerly I would have welcomed her. Sometimes families form in unexpected ways, I told her. The people who show up for you aren't always the ones you predict. As my health declined more rapidly than even Dr. Reeves had predicted, I worked with Walter to finalize my arrangements. Eleanor and Amanda helped me sort through the few personal possessions I'd brought from my apartment, deciding what should go where. These photo albums, I said, setting aside several books filled with pictures of Jessica and Brandon growing up. These will go to my children, but only after everything else is settled. Amanda nodded, understanding the sequence I had planned. One rainy afternoon, with Walter's assistance, I wrote the letter that would become the centerpiece of my final plan. It took several drafts to find the right tone. Not angry or bitter, but honest and clear. Walter advised me on the legal language that needed to be included, but the heart of the message was entirely mine. Do you think it will make a difference? I asked him after signing the final version. He carefully placed the letter in an envelope. I've been practicing estate law for 30 years, Margaret. I've seen money bring out the worst in families and occasionally, very occasionally, the best. What you're doing is giving them a chance at redemption. Whether they take it is up to them. On a bright Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after my accident, Walter called to inform me that my children had finally made contact, inquiring about my whereabouts. Shall I tell them about your condition? He asked. No, I said after a moment's reflection. Follow the plan as we discussed. They'll learn everything when the time is right. That evening, I sat in Eleanor's garden watching the sunset, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders despite the mild spring air. Amanda brought out tea and sat beside me. Are you having second thoughts? She asked gently. I considered the question seriously. No. I've spent a lifetime giving them everything, including chances to do the right thing. This last gift is different. It's a chance for them to become the people I always believed they could be. But they'll have to earn it. The next day, I revised my regular schedule at the youth center, knowing my time was growing shorter. Patricia helped arrange for me to record video messages for several of the teens I'd been mentoring, including Abigail. You've made such a difference to her, Patricia told me privately. She's talking about nursing school now. Says you inspired her. In 3 short weeks, I had formed a more meaningful connection with Abigail than I currently had with my own children. The irony wasn't lost on me. As my strength ebbed, I put the final pieces of my plan in place. Walter confirmed all legal documents were properly executed. Eleanor and Amanda promised to see my wishes fulfilled. And I wrote one last entry in the journal that would eventually find its way to Jessica and Brandon, but only when they were ready to truly receive its message. I faced the end with a serenity that surprised even me. Not because I had made peace with my children's betrayal, that wound would never fully heal, but because I had found purpose in my final chapter. And perhaps, just perhaps, I had created a legacy that would outlive both the pain and me. Exactly 1 week after the hospital had informed them of my accident, Jessica and Brandon arrived at my small apartment, only to find it empty and undisturbed. The neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Perkins, spotted them trying my door repeatedly. "Are you looking for Margaret?" she asked, clutching her cardigan closed. "Yes, I'm her daughter," Jessica replied impatiently. "Do you know where she is?" Mrs. Perkins frowned. "You're her daughter? Funny, she never mentioned having children that visited." Brandon stepped forward, using the charm that had served him well in business. "We've been very busy with our careers, but we're here now and need to find her. It's urgent." "Well, all I know is the ambulance came about 3 weeks ago. Terrible accident," they said. "Haven't seen her since." Mrs. Perkins eyed them suspiciously. "If you're really her children, wouldn't the hospital have called you?" Jessica and Brandon exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Which hospital?" Brandon demanded. "Mercy, I believe. It's where they take everyone from this neighborhood." They left without thanking her, already arguing as they headed to their rental car. At Mercy Hospital, the receptionist directed them to the nurses' station on the trauma floor. The charge nurse, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a stern expression, looked up from her computer. "Margaret Wilson? Let me check." Her fingers moved over the keyboard. "Yes, she was admitted following an MVA 3 weeks ago. She's no longer a patient here." "Where is she?" Jessica asked. "Was she transferred to another facility?" The nurse's expression hardened. "Are you family?" "Yes, I'm her daughter and this is her son," Jessica replied, gesturing to Brandon. "Interesting. We attempted to contact family when she was admitted. The responses we received indicated no family was available to assist with her care." Her tone made it clear she knew exactly who had given those responses. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "There was a misunderstanding. We're here now and need to know where our mother is." "I'm afraid I can't share that information," the nurse said coldly. "Mrs. Wilson left specific instructions regarding her privacy. If you want information about your mother, I suggest you contact her attorney." She slid a business card across the counter. "Mr. Green is handling her affairs." "This is ridiculous," Jessica snapped. "She's our mother. We have a right to know where she is." "Rights?" The nurse stood, her voice low but intense. "Let's talk about rights. Your mother had the right to expect her children would care about her welfare after a life-threatening accident. She had the right to family support during a health crisis. Those rights weren't honored, were they?" Brandon grabbed his sister's arm before she could respond. "Thank you for the contact information. We'll reach out to the attorney." In the hospital corridor, Jessica fumed. "How dare that woman judge us? She knows nothing about our situation." "Forget her," Brandon said tersely. "We need to find Mom. I've got a bad feeling about this." What Brandon didn't share with his sister was the growing panic he felt about his financial situation. His outward success masked mounting debt from risky investments gone wrong. His company was undergoing restructuring, and his position was far from secure. The possibility of an inheritance had suddenly become very relevant to his future. Jessica had her own motivations for the sudden concern. Her husband Alexander's political aspirations required significant financial backing, and their personal contribution was expected to be substantial. She had been counting on her mother's house eventually providing a windfall, modest as it might be. More immediately, she needed someone to occasionally watch her children during campaign events, and hired help was proving unreliable. They called Walter Green's office from the hospital parking lot and were surprised to be offered an appointment that same afternoon. The law firm occupied the top floor of a downtown building with views of Lake Michigan. Green's corner office featured dark wood furnishings and walls lined with leather-bound law books. Mr. and Ms. Wilson, he greeted them formally, not offering to shake hands. Please have a seat. Where is our mother? Jessica demanded without preamble. The hospital wouldn't tell us anything. Walter regarded them impassively. Your mother is deceased. She passed away peacefully 3 days ago. The blunt statement landed like a physical blow. Brandon sank into a chair, genuinely shocked. Jessica remained standing, her composure cracking. That's not possible, she whispered. She was supposed to recover. I'm afraid her injuries were complicated by a pre-existing condition. Cancer, which had metastasized extensively. The doctors gave her weeks, and unfortunately, they were correct. Cancer. Brandon looked up. She never said anything about cancer. Walter's expression didn't change. According to my notes, she was diagnosed approximately 6 months ago. She chose not to inform you. Jessica slowly sat down. Why wouldn't she tell us something like that? I believe, Walter said carefully, she felt it would be an imposition on your busy lives. She mentioned that you had made it clear family obligations were not a priority for either of you. The siblings sat in stunned silence, processing not only their mother's death, but the realization that she had faced a terminal diagnosis alone. There are arrangements to be made, Brandon finally said, his business training taking over in the face of emotional turmoil. And I assume there's a will to discuss. Walter nodded. Your mother was very specific about her wishes. The funeral has already taken place, a private service with a few close friends. Without us. Jessica's voice rose. How could you do that? I followed my client's explicit instructions, Walter replied calmly. As for the will, yes, there is one, and it directly concerns both of you. He removed a document from a folder on his desk. Before we proceed, there's something you should know. Your mother was aware of your responses when the hospital contacted you after her accident. Jessica paled. Brandon looked away. She overheard the calls. The doctor had put them on speaker while updating her chart. We were caught off guard, Brandon attempted to explain. It was a shock, and we didn't have all the information. Walter continued as if he hadn't spoken. What may also come as a shock is the value of your mother's estate. Margaret Wilson died with assets totaling just over $2 million. $2 million. Jessica's jaw dropped. That's impossible. Mom lived in a tiny apartment. She was always careful with money. Your mother lived simply by choice, not necessity. Robert's life insurance policy, wisely invested over 30 years. Her nursing pension. The proceeds from selling your childhood home. Various conservative investments that performed well. Walter looked at them directly. She could have afforded a very comfortable lifestyle. She chose frugality, partly to help put both of you through expensive universities without burdening you with student loans. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, visibly processing this revelation. So what does the will say? Before I get to that, your mother left a letter to be read in my presence. Walter withdrew an envelope from the folder. She was quite adamant about this sequence of events. A letter. Jessica reached for it. Walter held it just beyond her grasp. To be read aloud, if you please. Brandon took the envelope instead, carefully opening it. He unfolded several pages of handwritten text, immediately recognizing his mother's neat, precise handwriting. After a steadying breath, he began to read. My dear Jessica and Brandon, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I'm sorry you're learning about my passing in this formal way, but in truth, we became formal strangers long ago, didn't we? I want to begin by saying I loved you both completely from the moment you came into my life. Jessica, with your solemn eyes and tight grip on that tattered rabbit. Brandon, with your infectious laugh and endless energy. You weren't born from my body, but you were born in my heart, which has always seemed the more important origin to me. I remember every sacrifice I made for you with zero regrets. The double shifts at the hospital when you needed braces, Jessica. Selling my mother's silver to pay for your baseball camp, Brandon. The second mortgage to help with tuition. The meals I skipped so you could have new clothes for school. These weren't burdens. They were choices made out of love. What you may not know or remember. I sat by your bed for 3 straight nights when you had pneumonia, Jessica, sponging your forehead and monitoring your breathing while still working day shifts. I drove 4 hours each way every weekend for a month to watch Brandon's away games when he made the regional baseball championships, despite working overtime that whole period. I'm not listing these things to make you feel guilty, but because somewhere along the way you forgot. You forgot the thousands of small and large acts that make up a parent's love. You forgot that family isn't defined by blood but by who shows up, who stays, who sacrifices. When I heard you both dismiss me so casually after my accident, I won't pretend it didn't break something in me. To hear my daughter say she's not our real mom anyway, and my son imply I was a burden who guilt-tripped you. Those words confirmed what your actions had suggested for years. In your minds, I was an obligation you had escaped, not a mother you loved. I've had time to reflect on where things went wrong. Perhaps I gave too much, asked for too little in return. Perhaps I should have demanded the respect I hoped would come naturally. Or perhaps nothing I did would have mattered once you decided that real family required biological connection. Whatever the reasons, we are where we are. Or rather, I was where I was. Alone at a critical moment when family should have mattered most. You're now learning that I had more financial resources than you realized. I allowed you to believe I was nearly destitute because I wanted to know if you would help me out of love rather than expectation of return. It was a test I regret you failed. So we come to the matter of inheritance. Yes, there is money. Quite a lot of it, as Mr. Green has informed you. But access to those funds comes with conditions. My estate has been placed in a trust with specific requirements for distribution. First, you must each complete 500 hours of volunteer service at the Harmony Youth Center, working with teenagers in foster care or unstable homes. These hours must be documented and verified by the center's director. Second, you must attend monthly sessions with Dr. Sarah Levine, a family therapist, for a minimum of 1 year. This is non-negotiable and requires actual participation, not just attendance. Third, you must make monthly visits to my grave for the first year. Mr. Green will provide verification instructions. Only after completing these requirements will you each receive 1/3 of the estate. The final third has already been designated for a purpose you'll discover during your volunteer work. I know your first instinct may be to contest this will. Mr. Green assures me it's ironclad, but more importantly, fighting it would only prove my point about what truly matters to you. This isn't punishment. It's my final attempt to give you something money can't buy. Perspective. The children at Harmony have experienced real abandonment and betrayal, yet many still maintain capacity for trust and love that would humble you. The grave visits aren't about guilt but remembrance, not of how things ended, but of the 30 years before that. I forgive you for not being there when I needed you most. I hope someday you'll understand enough to forgive yourselves. With enduring love. Your mother, because I always will be, regardless of what you came to believe. P.S. You'll find a key in this envelope that opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside is a journal I've kept these last weeks. It's not to be retrieved until you've completed at least 200 hours at the youth center. Mr. Green has instructions to monitor this condition. Brandon's voice had grown increasingly unsteady as he read. By the end, he was blinking rapidly to clear his vision. Jessica sat perfectly still, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Walter allowed the silence to stretch for several minutes before speaking. Your mother was very clear about these conditions. They cannot be circumvented or abbreviated. 500 hours. Brandon finally said. That's months of work. I have a career, responsibilities. As did your mother when she raised you while working full-time after your father died. Walter replied evenly. Jessica wiped her face, her practical nature asserting itself. We'll contest it. No court would uphold something this controlling. Walter smiled thinly. You're welcome to try. However, your mother anticipated this reaction. The will includes affidavits from her doctors documenting her mental competence. There are witnesses to your neglect, including hospital staff who documented your responses when called about her accident. Her request for conditional disbursement is neither unusual nor unreasonable in legal terms. He closed the folder decisively. Additionally, should you choose to contest, a clause activates immediately donating the entire estate to the youth center. You would receive nothing regardless of the outcome. Brandon stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the lake. She really thought this through. Yes, Walter agreed. She spent her final weeks ensuring this plan was airtight. Not out of malice, but out of hope for your redemption. Jessica's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and grimaced before answering. Alexander, I can't talk right now. I'm in a meeting about my mother. Yes, she's passed away. No, it's complicated. She listened for a moment, her expression hardening. What do you mean? How much? I don't know yet. No, I can't just ask that right now. She ended the call with obvious embarrassment. My husband, she explained unnecessarily. He's concerned about arrangements. Financial arrangements, it seemed, Walter observed dryly. The meeting concluded with Walter providing documentation about the youth center and the therapist they were required to see. As they left his office, both siblings were uncharacteristically subdued. In the weeks that followed, Jessica and Brandon separately consulted other attorneys, seeking loopholes in their mother's will. Each received the same assessment. The conditions were legally sound, and contesting would likely result in them receiving nothing. Their personal lives rapidly complicated their decisions. Alexander's reaction to learning about the conditional inheritance was immediate and devastating. A year of volunteer work and therapy for money we might not see for months? That's absurd, he declared when Jessica explained the situation. We need capital now for the campaign, not some distant possibility. It's still over $600,000 eventually, Jessica argued. That's worth jumping through some hoops. We don't have eventually, Alexander countered. The primary is in 4 months. Either you find a way to access that money now, or we need to reconsider our financial strategy. Reconsider how? Jessica asked, not liking his tone. Alexander's expression grew cold. I married you believing we were building something together. Your family background wasn't ideal, but I overlooked that because I thought you understood the importance of practical matters. If you can't contribute as expected, perhaps we need to reassess our situation. 2 days later, he moved out, using the inheritance issue as his final justification. In reality, Jessica later learned, he had been having an affair with his campaign manager for months, waiting for the right moment to exit the marriage without financial penalty. Brandon's situation deteriorated just as rapidly. The corporate restructuring he had worried about resulted in his position being eliminated entirely. His severance package was generous, but would only sustain his lifestyle for a few months. Worse, his investment losses had left him with significant debt that was becoming increasingly difficult to service. Without better options, both siblings reluctantly contacted the Harmony Youth Center to begin their required volunteer hours. Patricia, the director, welcomed them with professional courtesy, but made it clear she knew exactly why they were there. Your mother was a remarkable woman who made a profound impact here in just a few weeks, she told them during orientation. I hope you'll approach this opportunity with the same open heart she demonstrated. Jessica was assigned to the Education Support Program, helping teens with homework and college applications. Brandon was placed in the Career Mentorship Program, tasked with teaching business skills and helping with resume writing. Their first days were awkward and uncomfortable. The teens were perceptive enough to sense their reluctance, responding with equal wariness. Jessica found herself faced with questions she couldn't answer about college financial aid forms. Brandon's corporate presentation style fell flat with teenagers who had experienced more real-world hardship than most adults. During Jessica's second week, a quiet girl with artistic talent approached her desk. You're Margaret's daughter, aren't you? She asked directly. Jessica looked up, startled. Yes. Did you know my mother? She helped me decide to become a nurse, the girl said. I'm Abigail. She talked about you sometimes. Jessica felt a strange mixture of guilt and curiosity. She did? What did she say? That you were smart and determined. That you went to Stanford. Abigail tilted her head. She was really proud of that. She had a photo of you at graduation that she carried in her purse. Jessica had no memory of giving her mother such a photo. The realization that Margaret had likely cut one from a social media post sent a wave of shame through her. Did she mention anything else? Jessica asked hesitantly. Just that she wished things were different between you. That family is complicated. Abigail gathered her books. She spent her last days helping kids who don't have parents, you know. Kids like me. I thought that was pretty special. The girl walked away, leaving Jessica with an uncomfortable weight in her chest. Brandon had a similar encounter with Patricia, who shared stories of Margaret's impact during her brief time volunteering. She could barely walk by the end, but she still came twice a week, Patricia told him. Several of our kids are pursuing healthcare careers because of her encouragement. One boy who never spoke to adults actually read a poem at her memorial service. There was a service? Brandon asked, the reality of his absence during this event hitting him anew. Small but meaningful. Eleanor and Amanda organized it. Your mother had very specific requests. Daisies everywhere. A recording of Robert's favorite song. Readings from Emily Dickinson. Brandon stared at her blankly. Who are Eleanor and Amanda? Patricia's expression softened with something like pity. The people who were with her at the end. The family she found when she needed one. 6 months into their service requirement, something unexpected began happening to both Jessica and Brandon. The work they had initially approached as an obligation gradually became meaningful in ways neither had anticipated. Jessica found herself genuinely invested in Abigail's college applications, staying late to help her craft essays and research scholarship opportunities. She noticed similarities between this quiet, determined girl and herself at that age. Except Abigail had faced challenges Jessica couldn't imagine without the safety net of a devoted mother. My foster mom's okay, Abigail confided one afternoon. She makes sure we have food and stuff. But she's got 5 kids placed with her, so there's not much time for college talk. Your mom was the first person who ever asked me what I wanted to be, not just what I planned to do to survive. Brandon's transformation was equally profound. A teenage boy named Marcus, whose father was incarcerated, initially treated Brandon's business advice with open skepticism. What good is resume formatting when no one will hire you with my address and last name? He challenged. Rather than dismissing the boy's concerns, Brandon found himself researching fair chance hiring practices and connecting with former colleagues who might offer internship opportunities. He started a weekly discussion group about entrepreneurship as an alternative to traditional employment, drawing on skills the teens already possessed. Amanda became a regular presence at the center, continuing her own volunteer work while observing the siblings' gradual evolution. After witnessing Brandon successfully help Marcus secure an interview, she approached him during a break. Your mother would be proud, she said simply. This is exactly what she hoped would happen. Brandon looked up from his notes. You knew her well? Amanda nodded. I was with her nearly every day those last weeks. She lived with my mother, Eleanor, after the accident. I'd like to hear about that time, Brandon said, surprising himself with the sincerity of the request. If you're willing to share. Over coffee in the center's small kitchen, Amanda showed him photos on her phone of Margaret during her final weeks. Images of his mother in a garden with daisies. Margaret smiling weakly but genuinely while helping Abigail with a biology textbook. A group picture with several teens, taken just days before she passed. She was in pain toward the end, but she never complained, Amanda told him. She was more concerned about the kids here having what they needed. She donated art supplies, books, even arranged for a cooking class they'd been wanting. Brandon studied the photos, noting how thin his mother had become, how the vibrant woman from his childhood had diminished physically while apparently expanding in spirit. She looks happy despite everything. She found purpose, Amanda said. And she found peace with her decision about you and your sister. The will, you mean, Brandon said, his voice tight. Not just that. Her decision to give you one last chance to understand what really matters. Amanda held his gaze steadily. She forgave you, you know. She said that several times. But forgiveness doesn't mean erasing consequences. Jessica had a similar conversation with Eleanor, who visited the center to donate books from Margaret's collection. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Eleanor told her bluntly. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. Do you know she arranged her own hospice care? Selected her own memorial readings? All while volunteering here and mentoring those kids. Jessica helped unpack the book donation, recognizing several volumes from her childhood home. I'm starting to realize there was a lot I didn't know about her. She wasn't subtle about her love for you and your brother, Eleanor continued. That room was covered in your photos. Every accomplishment, every milestone. She talked about both of you constantly. But we weren't there when it mattered, Jessica admitted, the words painful but necessary. No, you weren't, Eleanor agreed. But she believed you could learn from that failure. That's why we're having this conversation now, isn't it? As they approached the 200-hour mark of their service, Walter contacted them about retrieving the journal from the safety deposit box. They met him at the bank on a Friday afternoon, both nervous about what they might find within its pages. The journal was a simple leather-bound book, filled with Margaret's familiar handwriting. Unlike the letter, which had been formal and carefully structured, these entries were raw, emotional, and deeply personal. The earliest entries detailed her cancer diagnosis and decision not to burden her children with the news. Later passages described the accident and the devastating moment when she overheard their responses to the hospital's calls. But the majority of the journal focused on her final weeks, her friendship with Eleanor and Amanda, her work at the youth center, and most surprisingly, her reflections on her role in the family's breakdown. Perhaps I enabled their worst tendencies, one entry read. By giving everything and asking for nothing, did I teach them that love flows only one way? Did my sacrifice become a burden they resented rather than a gift they valued? I cannot change the past, but I can offer them a path to a different future. Another passage detailed her growing bond with Abigail. She reminds me so much of Jessica at that age. Bright, guarded, afraid to hope too much. Today she showed me a sketch she'd done of the hospital garden. Such talent, such sensitivity. I've arranged for part of my estate to fund a scholarship for her and others like her. Children who have been forgotten but refused to disappear. The final entry, dated just 2 days before her death, brought both siblings to tears. I don't know if Jessica and Brandon will fulfill the conditions of my will. I hope they do, not for the money, but for what they might discover about themselves in the process. I hope they meet Abigail, Marcus, and the others. I hope they understand that these children, with so much less than my own had, still possess the capacity for gratitude and love that somewhere along the way my children lost. If they're reading this, it means they've begun the journey. To Jessica and Brandon, I loved you from the moment you came into my life until my final breath. That never changed even when your love for me seemed to. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who shows up. Sometimes it's who sees your value when others don't. I found a kind of family in my final days that brought me peace. My last wish is that you find your way back to being the people I know you can be. People capable of showing up, of seeing value beyond utility, of giving without expectation of return. That would be a legacy worth leaving. By the time they completed their 500 hours, Jessica and Brandon had been transformed in ways neither could have predicted. Jessica, divorced from Alexander and rebuilding her life, found purpose in establishing an arts program at the center, showcasing Abigail's talent, and that of other creative teens. Brandon, having secured Marcus an internship that turned into a permanent position, used his business connections to create a mentorship network for other youth center participants. When the time came to formally receive their inheritance, they met again in Walter's office, now as very different people than they had been a year earlier. Your mother would be pleased with your progress, Walter noted, observing the change in their demeanor. You've met all the conditions of the will. What about the final third of the estate? Brandon asked. You mentioned we would discover its purpose during our volunteer work. Walter smiled for perhaps the first time in their presence. As you may have learned, your mother established a scholarship fund for foster children pursuing higher education or vocational training. The first recipients have already been selected, Abigail and Marcus among them. Jessica nodded, not surprised. That seems right. More than right. There's one additional matter, Walter continued. Your mother left each of you a personal item to be given only upon completion of the requirements. He removed 2 small packages from his desk drawer. She was very specific about the timing. Jessica's package contained the locket her mother had sold years ago to help pay for her braces. Somehow recovered and restored. Inside was a tiny photo of Jessica as a child, laughing in Margaret's arms. Brandon received their father's watch, long thought lost, with an inscription added to the back. Time is the only true currency. Spend it on what matters. Instead of immediately accessing their portions of the inheritance, Jessica and Brandon made a joint decision that would have astonished their former selves. They established a matching fund for their mother's scholarship program, effectively doubling its impact, and created a permanent endowment for the Youth Center's family reunification program. On the anniversary of Margaret's passing, they visited her grave together, placing daisies against the simple headstone. They had come monthly as required by the will, but this visit was different, motivated by genuine grief and gratitude rather than obligation. She was right, you know, Jessica said as they stood side by side. About everything. Brandon nodded. The irony is that by making us work for the inheritance, she made it mean something. If she had just left it to us outright, we wouldn't have deserved it, Jessica finished. And we wouldn't have understood what she was really trying to give us. They had recently met Eleanor and Amanda for dinner, sharing stories about Margaret and viewing additional photos from her final weeks. What had begun as an awkward obligation had evolved into a genuine friendship, another unexpected gift from their mother's final plan. As they turned to leave the cemetery, Brandon paused. Do you think she knew this would happen? That we'd actually change? Jessica considered the question. I think she hoped. And she loved us enough to give us the chance to become better people, even when we gave her every reason to give up on us. That's what real parents do, I guess, Brandon said quietly. Love beyond what's deserved. Show up even when it's hard. Something we had to lose to finally understand, Jessica agreed. They walked together to their cars, changed not by the inheritance they had received, but by the journey required to earn it. Margaret's true legacy wasn't financial but transformational. The wisdom to recognize that family is defined not by obligation or blood, but by love demonstrated through action, presence, and sacrifice. In forcing her children to confront the consequences of their neglect, Margaret had given them one final, precious gift: the chance to rediscover their humanity and, in doing so, to truly become her children again. What would you do if you were in Margaret's position? Would you have given your children a second chance, or simply left them to face the consequences of their actions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder about what family truly means. Remember, sometimes the most precious inheritance isn't money, but the lessons we learn along the way. Thank you for listening to my story today.